Alright, welcome back everybody. Let's take a look at the history of one of the most iconic monsters in all of D&D, the Beholder. If you ever played this game, odds are you know exactly what it is, and it has been described in hundreds of ways. You get on the internet, you can find just endless pictures, it seems. But going back through the history of this creature, this is the very first picture I can find of one. This goes back before there was any first edition, really back before they had the basic rules. And at this time, they really just had a few little pamphlets. You can see a handful of these originals still in the hands of some of the people who really collect the material. I'm sure they probably cost hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars. But I think this may have been the very first picture of a Beholder here. And notice in this illustration, not nearly as scary looking as what they have them today. It looks just like a little ball with a little eye and a little mouth, and it looks almost like worms coming out the top of its head right there. But moving on from that original picture, I actually have the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. So this was the first monster manual. And before you get into all the monsters that are in it, I've noticed over the years when I'd look over these things, a line I never forgot about the Beholder. Here in the little preface here, Gary Gygax was giving credit to some of the people who gave him assistance. And look at this line right here that I've got highlighted. Something mentioning here to Terry Kuntz, who was never thanked for his prototypical Beholder, a revised version of which was included in Greyhawk, which we just saw. So I've always assumed Terry right here created the Beholder, at the very least created that first illustration. So you may have heard that name before, but coming right from Gygax right there, that had to have been the original person responsible. Now this is exactly what we see in the very first monster manual. So Beholders always have a certain set of characteristics, but of course every one of them is different. That's always stressed in the books, and every Beholder thinks it is the only one perfect Beholder, and all the others have something wrong with them and need to be destroyed. So they've got huge egos. But looking at this one right here, I can remember as a kid looking at this picture, I thought this was like sewn together pieces, you know, something that was created in a lab like a flesh golem is, how they're sewn together. But obviously they're not, and they give a little difference down here in the description. But they've always been spherical. This mouth always reminded me about like something you'd see on a great white shark. And of course there's that huge central eye, and all the eye stalks always look about like worms to me right there. Back in the first edition here, there's actually different armor classes for different sections of the Beholder. Its hard chitinous body had one armor class, this big central eye another, and then the eye stalks one themselves. You can see the number of hit points right here. I think they even assigned 15 hit points to the eye and basically 30 to the body itself right there. And about 10 to 15 points of damage would whack off one of the eye stalks if somebody was actually working on one of those. But the hit points are a lot lower. Everything back in the earlier editions was like that. You know, everything just slowly gets escalated over time. So they didn't have nearly as many hit points, but you couldn't do nearly as much damage at this time either. Notice too at the size, they tell you 4 to 6 feet in diameter. Seems like they've slowly gotten larger over the years also. So they just give you a little description here in this first paragraph, tell you how they might live in a very desolate wilderness, but most of the time they're going to be found underground. And that's what you think of with Dungeons and Dragons. So they talk about it levitating, floating, having the eye stalks, the big eye, the pointy teeth, the different armor class sections, and the hit points, and so on down the line. And something else you'll notice as they go over the Beholder through the different editions, they talk about it using different numbers of eye stalks in a round. And 1 to 4 is the largest I've seen here in the first. And I think that held around for a little while. At one time, I think it was 2 attacks. Currently, I believe it's 3. So that's another place we've seen some differences. And they also talk about the eye stalk spells. Notice how there were 2 different charms back earlier, and that stuck around, I think, for several editions. There was a charm person and monster. So a lot of these you've seen before right here, and the anti-magic ray coming out of that central eye was always one of the biggest ones. But that was the first picture I'd ever seen of a Beholder, and still the primary one I think of right there. Now, even back with first edition, this is still the same monster manual right here. They were already looking at variations and mimics and things such as that. So what you see this guy hitting with a sword right here is not a Beholder, but a mimic of it called a gas spore. This thing was basically like a fungus that mimicked a Beholder. Now, how in the world that come about is a good question right there. There may or may not be a story behind it. But they would float around just hoping someone like this guy right here would hit them. They tell you they'd be 90% likely to be mistaken for a beholder. And if they were struck for even 1 point of damage, they would explode, doing 6 to 36 hit points of damage all around them. So that's going to kill a lot of creatures right there. They tell you that if the gas spore makes contact with exposed flesh, the spore shoots its tiny rhizomes into the living matter and grows throughout the victim's system in but one melee round, so incredibly fast. The gas spore dies immediately. The victim must get a cure disease within 24 hours or die, sprouting 2 to 8 more gas spores. So there was a little mimic of the beholder way back in first edition. I always thought this was something fun to put in dungeons. Why they ever did away with it in the future editions, I had no idea. And going back to this same book right here too, this is still advanced first edition, Eye of the Deep. This was sort of like a scrawny cousin of the beholder that was far weaker and lived in the ocean. So here they even tell you they believe it's a relative of the beholder. Lives at great depths. It has this blinding, flashing light that can dazzle and stun enemies and such around it. But it can use these 2 little eye stalks to create an illusion, or they could act independently to cast Hold Person or Hold Monster. So if you want to throw one of these guys into 5th edition right here, it'd be pretty easy to do. Now moving on to 2nd edition, they really started to stretch out. I believe about this time they really saw a lot more interest in the beholder. So they gave a great little table right here that gives a little side-by-side summary of these beholder and beholder kin. So in the first column's what you would expect, and of course notice how things were reported differently at this time, especially things like armor class, but notice hit points were a lot lower right here. There's one of the first variations of the Death Kiss. I always thought of it as like the vampire version, right? Likes to blood drain. The Eye of the Deep we just saw in that previous picture. Here's the Goth right here. There's the Spectator. The Spectator is always another one of the small cousins of the beholder, always used to guard treasure, some kind of item like that. And then they already started looking at undead. So it was very much the same as the original beholder, but of course had the undead characteristics. So there's all the individual sections. They talk about combat. And again, you can see some of the spells from the eyes are a little bit different right here, is what you see with 5th edition. Notice our armor class is different, and again you'd have to specify which section you're attacking so you know what armor class you're going up against and so on down the line. And here they gave little pictures of them. That was the original right there. That was what the Death Kiss, and there's the Eye of the Deep, and so on down the line. Here's the little beholder right here that's undead. Looks almost like a ghost right there in that picture. So that was how they looked at him in 2nd edition. Then moving on to 3rd right here, right? You may have seen this one before, getting a little bit closer to more modern times. And as you can see, the hit points was slowly creeping up. And that happened with everything in D&D. Everything's slowly gotten tougher over the generations of the book and the decades and such. So there's all the reporting characteristics. And look here. Now it's gone from 4 to 6 feet up to 8 feet wide. So it's definitely getting larger. They told you down here they often attack without provocation. And the eye stalk spells are actually working just like a 13th level spellcaster. So they started getting a little bit more specific right here. And there again is another picture. Just look at the size of those teeth. Look like daggers right there. The eye in this one's a little bit smaller than what you see with a lot of them. But again, every beholder's different. You could draw them in 1,000 different ways. And even the little eyes on the stalks look a little bit smaller right there. So there was all the information they gave you right there. These operated pretty much the same as what you would think of today. Then in 4th edition, it really got kind of squirrely and crazy right here. And it was where they talked about beholders in different levels. I never played this version, 4th edition right here. But it was really almost like they were trying to look at immature, like almost like a young type beholder right here, and then sort of like a middle-aged or older, but they were doing it in different ways. But again, look at the hit points. Even the scrawny one right here had 102. And look at the eye rays right here. Forget back where I was at, fire ray, exhaustion, sleep, and telekinesis was all it had, in addition to the central eye. But then you had the larger ones right here, level 9 and then a level 19, which is really tough. And look at this thing, 720 hit points. Again, they really started to go up much higher with the hit points and other things, but overall it's still largely the same beholder that you would think of. Then that brings us to 5th edition right here. Here's a picture that you probably have in a book right here yourself. They gave us some little interesting facts along the way. This 5th edition was probably the first one where they really tried to give you some background. They gave, what was it, 2 or 3 pages of information, then looked at just a few little variants right there. So one interesting thing about beholders they always bring up is when a beholder sleeps, it closes its central eye but leaves its smaller eyes open and alert. And at the same time when they sleep and they dream, it alters reality, everything around them. Remember, beholders are from the far realm, a place that's completely different from anything seen in the realms of what you think of with D&D. And I believe it was 4th edition or one of them, they said that even seeing the far realm would make most any creature from this realm or plane or whatever go mad. So it's a very different place. Beholders always suspect others of plotting against them even when no other creatures are around. Paranoia, big word always mentioned with beholders right there. Each beholder believes its form is ideal and that any deviation from that form is a flaw. Another thing about beholders, they always think all other beholders are just abominations and should just be destroyed on sight. Another big thing you see with them. They talk about some of these beholders, or eye tyrants, whatever they like to call them here, have been known to control vast empires. So we've seen that before in some books. Alien lairs, beholder lairs, are carved out by their disintegration eye rays. If they don't find a cavern they like, they just keep on carving. And they often like to go vertical. They know a lot of animals can't fly or hover or levitate like they can, so it'd make it very difficult for the other creatures to get around. But the beholder, easier, no problem for them. The beholder judges its own worth by its acquisitions, and it never willingly parts with its treasures right there. So that's a strong one. They're going to want to collect gold just as much as any creature, magic, any other item, whatever it may be, and they're not going to want to turn loose of it for any reason. So there's the lair actions right there, some interesting little effects when they're at their little home base right there. And here they talk about more of the regional effects. When the beholder sleeps, minor warps in reality occur within 1 mile of its lair. That's a long distance right there. And then, of course, here's one of the variants, the Death Tyrant right here. On rare occasions, a beholder's sleeping mind drifts to places beyond its normal madness, imagining a reality in which it exists beyond death. When such dreams take hold, a beholder can transform, its flesh sloughing away to leave a death tyrant behind. This monster possesses the cunning and much of the magic it had in life, but it's fueled by the power of undeath. So, of course, that one there looks more like a skull with all the flesh rotted off of it right there. And they talk about how they can build just endless armies of undead. There doesn't seem to be any limit to how many they could create. So somebody could have a beholder with hundreds of skeletons, zombies, whatever kind of little undead minions guarding its lair too. Good thing to throw in right there. So there's the Death Tyrant's lair actions and regional effects and such right there. Again, they vary. And then, of course, here's the main stat block. And this is the current picture they've used right here. This one looks a lot more maybe amphibian-like, right? A little bit more frog-like to me in appearance than what you saw some in the past. But, of course, they've always got a lot of the same characteristics and so on. There to mention a little dwarf sage mentioning something about it. Look at the hit points here, 180, right? Different what we saw in 4th edition quite a bit right there. And then, of course, here they go over all the individual stats. And you're familiar with this, the common anti-magic cone. But, of course, back here with the Death Beholder, right, they used to like to use something a little bit different right there. Here, somewhere in here, it's in one of these other pictures. They mention, of course, how its primary eye, the big, large, central one, is an anti-magic, but does a different type of damage. So notice with the eye rays and such right here, unlike in the earlier editions, you didn't see a charm person and monster. You just have a charm ray now. So again, a few of these things have changed up right there. You've seen that before. There's the Death Tyrant. As we're saying, with its central eye, it's different. It gives that negative energy cone right there. And look at this. Any humanoid that dies there becomes a zombie. So again, these things could have an unlimited amount. So they're mostly the same, but of course they're going to have undead characteristics and such. And again, here's the Spectator. These have been around for quite a while. I've got the module behind me back here somewhere that I can remember first seeing the Spectator. I'd have to look through it to see which one that was right there. But notice they're described as a lesser beholder, sort of like the Eye of the Deep is, and a lot of other variations. These right here are magical guardians, so they can be summoned to guard something for 101 years. And something I thought was very odd about this one was that long tongue. Remember I just mentioned that previous one looked a little bit more amphibian or frog-like. You would think that would be a prehensile-like tongue that could reach out and maybe grab someone and restrain them. Maybe pull them in for a bite, you know, if they don't make a grappling save or something such as that right there. So that might be something you could throw in with a Spectator. Maybe that tongue is something else that's different that they just didn't really mention anything about. So, of course, they're not nearly as dangerous. That's what you throw at your party when they're at a lower level right there. And then right here we can see the undead, or excuse me, beholder zombie shown right here. Now, this is at the back of the current 5e monster manual there. So there's the beholder zombie. And again, there are as many variations of this thing as you could imagine. If you got on the internet, you could probably find at least 20, 30 different types. I even made up one myself right here, the aquatic beholder. Now, if you want, you can get all this information right here off of the Dungeon Masters Guild. It says $1, but you can pay what you want. You can download this thing for nothing right here. But again, I thought of my own little variation right here. One that's strictly in the water. So this one right here, good armor class, look at the hit points. Like a lot of things that are found in the water, they tend to grow a little bit larger and heavier. Think like whales and things, you know, you don't see those on land. Could never happen. So I made this a little bit bigger. And that central eye has a thunder wave. It's basically like a wave of force goes out through the water and does damage. So again, just mixed it up right here. They've still got their bite action and claw attacks. Two of their eye rays have actually become crab-like arms and pincers right here. But looking at the eye rays, you can see right here they could cast this Conjure Sea Monster. This is something different. With the aquatic form of the beholder, just wanted to give it something totally new right here. So I made up different effects for the eye rays. And how about this on a 100 roll, summons a Kraken or Aboleth. That one could be optional for fun, but that'd be something to throw at the party right there as the DM. They can create a whirlpool, a vortex that would do damage to individuals right here. A tsunami like a tidal wave. A salt bomb that does corrosive damage. Entangle with seaweeds, right? A grappling effect with seaweed. Drown. This magical eye ray here causes an individual's lungs to fill with water if they weren't already magically breathing water. Putrid water acts like poisonous water. Water jet would be a hard, forceful hit, and so on down the line. Even gave them some different legendary actions, talked about the appearance and so on, but I'm not an artist, so I can't draw one out like they have in all the others. So that's just some history from the beginning up to the current 5th edition and a little bit more, a little of my own material made up right here on the Beholder. So I hope you enjoyed this right here on the Beholder. We may look at some of this information. There's so much on them, more in a future video. But until next time, good luck and good gaming.